Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much, Phil. Thanks to the AusNOG and to Vocus for having me here today. It's a bit tough being the government guy who comes in, especially after the lunch break on day 2, to talk about government policy. So I'll try and keep you all awake. I guess what I'm aiming to do with my presentation today is to talk you through a little bit about how we look at critical infrastructure security in the Australian government. Hopefully I can put a bit of a communications sector flavour to that. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the security risks and the threat picture that we're seeing in Australia's critical sectors. So maybe a little bit about me. I think first thing to say up front is that I'm not a technical person and I'm relatively new to the communications sector. My current job title is I'm the Acting Assistant Secretary for Risk Assessment in the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Centre at Home Affairs, and I'll give some information about what the CISC is. So in my current role, I'm leading a branch of about 45 people, and that branch is split along sectoral teams. So in Australia, there's 11 critical sectors as defined under the legislation. And in my usual day job, I'm the director of the Telecommunications Security Risk Team. And so that's the team that looks after the TSSR obligations and the framework under Part 14 of the TEL Act. So we engage with telecommunications carriers and carriage service providers to make sure they understand their security obligations. So as I said, I'm not a technical guy, so hopefully you don't have too many technical questions at the end of this presentation. My background is more in the national security community in Australia. I've worked in government for about 15 years, and I came to Home Affairs 2 years ago to work in critical infrastructure security. So that's a bit about me. So I'll dive straight in. I think what I want to say up front is that I think it can be very easy to get overwhelmed when we think about our reliance on critical infrastructure, but it really is becoming increasingly important. All of us in this room and all Australians rely on critical infrastructure every day to deliver essential services that underpin our economy, security and our sovereignty. The Cyber and Infrastructure Security Centre works cooperatively with industry to uplift the security and resilience of critical infrastructure. We're a relatively small group of policy, regulatory and technical staff with the primary goal of ensuring the protection and security of Australia's most critical assets. Our job is to make sure that security is upheld, safeguarded and continuously improved upon, and we work closely with state government and industry stakeholders to do that. So as I said, secure and resilient critical infrastructure is vital to the functioning of Australian society. It ensures continuous access to services that are essential for everyday life, such as food, water, healthcare, energy and transport. The communications sector, including internet service providers in particular, plays an essential role in enabling economic and social activity in Australia, as well as ensuring the availability and connectivity of other critical assets. Large telecommunications companies and businesses increasingly rely on ISPs, in particular ISPs, to assist in delivering their internet services. The failure or compromise of telecommunications services, including through a cyber attack on an ISP, would have negative cascading impacts on the delivery and support of other critical infrastructure services, with severe consequences for Australia's economy, physical security, and the availability of essential services. In a volatile and rapidly changing risk environment, it's imperative that government and ISPs work collaboratively to achieve a shared security outcome. Okay, so I'll just work through a bit of a timeline of some of the policies and the legislative frameworks that we work with. So obviously 9/11 in 2001 and also terrorist attacks in Indonesia in 2002, they were the catalyst for more formal engagement between the Commonwealth, state and territory governments and industry on how to prepare for and respond to threats against critical infrastructure assets. In 2003, the government established a Trusted Information Sharing Network, or TISN, as the primary engagement mechanism for business and government to share information and to build resilience initiatives for critical infrastructure. Through the TISN, member organisations meet regularly within and across sector groups in a secure, non-competitive environment to enhance the security and resilience of critical infrastructure by doing the following things: understanding threat, vulnerability and consequence to better manage risk, increasing awareness and understanding of cross-sector dependencies and impacts of disruption to any critical infrastructure sector, enhancing communication channels and networks between industry and all levels of government, identifying gaps and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies within each sector, and informing future policies and programs to support critical infrastructure resilience. Eligible organisations can request to join the TISN by submitting an online form via the CISC's website. The Department of Home Affairs has become the lead Australian government agency responsible for cybersecurity and critical infrastructure policy. In 2017, the Critical Infrastructure Centre, which is our earlier name, was established within the department in response to the complex and evolving national security risks to critical infrastructure, including sabotage, espionage, and foreign interference. In 2018, the Australian government took several steps to uplift the security and resilience of Australia's critical infrastructure, particularly the telecommunications sector. The Security of Critical Infrastructure Act of 2018, or the SOCI Act as we call it, was introduced to create a framework for regulation and protection of Australia's 11 critical infrastructure sectors. It's designed to manage risks by ensuring owners and operators of critical infrastructure assets are taking appropriate steps to secure their assets, and by ensuring that the government has the information required to manage national security risks and appropriate and proportionate powers to respond to risks. Some of the key obligations for regulated entities under the SOCI Act include mandatory cyber incident reporting, a requirement to register on the Register of Critical Infrastructure Assets, and a requirement to maintain a risk management program addressing specific areas of material risk and setting out controls to mitigate risks as far as reasonably practicable. The risk management program has not yet been enacted for the telecommunications sector. Certain critical infrastructure entities are also considered systems of national significance, or SONS, which brings with it additional obligations under the SOCI Act, including enhanced cybersecurity obligations. In 2018, Part 14 of the Telecommunications Act was introduced to better manage the national security risks of sabotage, espionage and foreign interference to Australia's telecommunications networks and facilities. Part 14 sets out the security obligations for telecommunications carriers and carriage service providers and serves as the compliance framework for security regulation of the sector. Under this Act, carriers and carriage service providers must do their best to protect their networks and facilities they own, operate or use from unauthorised access and interference. This is known as the security obligation. They should also maintain competent supervision of and effective control over telecommunications networks and facilities that they own and operate. Carriers and CSPs must notify government of proposed changes to their telecommunications systems or services that are likely to have a material adverse effect on their capacity to comply with the security obligation. And that's what we call the notification obligation. In August 2018, the Australian government released the 5G security guidance, which outlines the government's expectations of the application of Part 14 to the deployment of 5G networks. Under the 5G security guidance, the government considers that the involvement of vendors who are likely to be subject to extrajudicial direction from a foreign government in a way that conflicts with Australian law may risk failure by a carrier to adequately protect their 5G networks from unauthorised access and interference. The 5G security guidance is country agnostic, transparent, risk-based and non-discriminatory, applying equally to all companies and countries, and was determined following a comprehensive and objective review of national security risks unique to 5G networks in Australia. In 2021, the Critical Infrastructure Centre was succeeded by the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Centre, as it's known now, the CISC. The CISC facilitates an all-hazards infrastructure resilience regime enabled by a strong focus on cybersecurity in partnership with government, industry and the broader community. The CISC also actively assists Australian critical infrastructure owners and operators to understand the risk environment and meet their regulatory requirements and obligations. The CISC also has direct regulatory responsibility for aviation transport security, maritime transport and offshore facility security, as well as telecommunications security. The CISC takes an all-hazards approach to critical infrastructure security, centred on 4 key hazard vectors, which should form the basis of an entity's risk management considerations. First is physical security. Risks to part of the asset critical to the functioning of the asset, including physical access to sensitive facilities or risks from natural disasters. Cyber and information security. So risks to digital systems, computers, data sets, and networks that underpin critical infrastructure systems. Personnel security. So this is the trusted insider risk posed by critical workers who have access and ability to disrupt the functioning of an asset. And supply chain security. The risk of disruption to critical supply chains leading to a relevant impact on the critical infrastructure asset. The telecommunications security risk section in the CISC, which is the team that I lead, regularly engages with carriers and ISPs about their security posture and will encourage them to continually invest in cybersecurity and other measures to appropriately manage the risk of cyber breaches. Following the Optus and Medibank breaches in 2022, the Department of Home Affairs reviewed existing legislative mechanisms and policy frameworks for critical infrastructure to consider how to better support stronger cyber incident management and further uplift of the critical infrastructure ecosystem. Both the independent Falk review and the PJCIS Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security review of Part 14 recommended reforms to harmonise the security obligations for telecommunications carriers and CSPs under the TEL Act with those obligations for critical infrastructure entities under the SOCI Act. As a result, and as an ongoing action out of the 2023-2030 Australian Cybersecurity Strategy, the Department is progressing reforms to amalgamate and enhance security obligations for telecommunications under the SOCI Act. The Department, in coordination with the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts, or we like to just call them DETRITICA. I think you heard from one of their reps either today or yesterday. So together with them, we've been leading a body of work to consult with industry stakeholders on the proposed reforms, including incorporating industry views to help shape the proposed provisions. This engagement has been conducted through the Australian Telecommunications Security Reference Group, or the ATSRG, and some people in this room may be members or their organisations may be members of that group. A bill is expected to be introduced to Parliament to progress and implement these changes in the spring sittings. The National Office of Cybersecurity, or the NOCS, was established in May 2023 to support the National Cybersecurity Coordinator in leading consequence management for national cyber incidents, whole-of-government cyber preparedness efforts, and the strengthening of Commonwealth cybersecurity capability. So it's worth pointing out that the NOCS is a separate part of the department, and it's deliberately kept separate from the CISC, partly because given the CISC has regulatory functions, and the NOCS often receives information voluntarily from industry about cyber attacks, we want to make sure that there's a partition between the regulatory or any punitive side of what the department does with voluntary sharing of information from industry to the NOCS. The National Cybersecurity Coordinator is Lieutenant General Michelle McGuinness. She was appointed in February of this year. The NOCS works closely with the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of ASD, to coordinate government response to cybersecurity incidents. So that's just to illustrate that the CISC doesn't have an emergency response type function. We will be involved in conversations when a major outage happens or a cyber incident happens, but it's really the NOCS role to manage incident response for cybersecurity. So critical infrastructure is increasingly interconnected globally, with disruptions able to easily cascade across sectors and national boundaries. So we saw this, for example, the recent CrowdStrike incident is a very good example of that. And I've got some stats here. They're actually from 22-23. We're hoping to get some updated stats from ASD soon. But during financial year 22-23, Australian critical infrastructure networks regularly experienced both targeted and opportunistic malicious cyber activity. Activity against these networks is likely to increase as networks grow in size and complexity. ASD's ACSC, in their annual cyber threat report of 22-23, states that the ACSC received nearly 94,000 cybercrime reports, an increase of 23% from the previous financial year, and they responded to 143 cybersecurity incidents related to critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure faces increased susceptibility to attack by nation-states, state-sponsored actors, issue-motivated groups, or extremist groups seeking to advance their own interests. An example is the publicly reported Chinese hacking network known as Volt Typhoon that had been pre-positioning inside US critical infrastructure, possibly for a number of years. The network exploited US technological and security weaknesses, but rather than stealing secret and sensitive information, the intelligence community understands that the purpose of this hack was to pre-position the PRC in critical infrastructure for acts of future sabotage, particularly in the event of a major crisis or conflict with the US. It is likely that Volt Typhoon was part of a larger effort to infiltrate Western critical infrastructure, including naval ports, internet service providers, communications services, and utilities. A report published by our US counterparts, the CISA, and supported by ASD, said that Volt Typhoon hackers had maintained this access for the past 5 years. And while it has targeted only US infrastructure, the infiltration was likely to have affected the Five Eyes allies. A number of other countries have also recently publicly identified Chinese-backed hackers as targeting state networks and infrastructure, and ASD's ACSC assesses Australian critical infrastructure could be vulnerable to similar activity from PRC state-sponsored actors. The CISC works closely with national intelligence community partners to share threat and risk information and to relay releasable risk assessment advice to industry to foster a collaborative and supportive approach to collective security. One of these partners is the ACSC, as I mentioned earlier, which is a division of the Australian Signals Directorate. The ACSC was established in 2014 as the lead operational agency for responding to cyber incidents. ACSC seeks to improve Australia's national cyber resilience through operating the Australian Cybersecurity Hotline, which is contactable 24/7, also through publishing vulnerability alerts, technical advice and advisories and notifications on significant and emerging cybersecurity threats. They also do cyber threat monitoring and intelligence sharing with domestic and overseas partners, and they conduct exercises and uplift activities to enhance cybersecurity resilience of Australian organisations. So I may be at risk of telling you things you already know in these next couple of slides. ASD has developed a number of prioritised mitigation strategies to protect themselves against various cyber threats. The most effective of these mitigation strategies are the Essential 8. The Essential 8 has been designed primarily to protect organisations' internet-connected networks. The mitigation strategies that constitute the Essential 8 are patch applications, patch operating systems, use multi-factor authentication, restrict administrative privileges, application control, restrict Microsoft Office macros, use application hardening, and do regular backups. The Essential 8 maturity model, first published in June 2017 and updated regularly, supports the implementation of the Essential 8. It is based on ASD's experience in producing cyber threat intelligence, responding to cybersecurity incidents, conducting penetration testing, and assisting organisations to implement the Essential 8. The CISC encourages entities to consider implementing guidance from the Essential 8, including other industry standards. We encourage you implementing the Essential 8 and also other industry standards to build cybersecurity resilience. The government recognises that ISPs are crucial in providing the first line of defence against cyber threats through their ability to monitor and filter traffic passing over a network. It is important that ISPs actively ensure that managed service providers and telecommunications providers themselves are prioritising the security of their networks. The government maintains a commitment to working closely with industry, including ISPs, to ensure collective understanding of security best practice in this sector. And I'd just encourage everyone in the room today to have a look at our website and to get in touch, particularly about joining the TISN if you're not already a member of the TISN, the Communications TISN. Really, that's the end of the presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you. Thanks for your time.